Hey all, here at OS Reviews, you're watching our video review of the China Mobile N3. At 75 bucks MRSP, it's the cheapest phone in the world with a Snapdragon 625 processor. As we documented in our unboxing and first impressions video, this is made possible by the fact that the phone is produced by a carrier. So think of it as a phone made by T-Mobile or AT&T in the US. They're able to generate revenue by gaining subscribers as well as through their services, so they can make the phone itself a little cheaper than a manufacturer like Huawei, Apple, or Samsung can. That's why the specs here are many times more expensive than the price would suggest. In fact, it looks and feels like a device that would retail for 500 or 600 bucks if it was sold by a more premium manufacturer, including an all-glass finish on the front and on the back, which shimmers against the light. There's also a fingerprint scanner and a real dual camera setup that composes a 13 megapixel RGB with a 2 megapixel depth sensor. There's also a dual tone LED flash, and the rim of the phone is made entirely out of aluminum, so again, it feels extremely hefty in the hands. It has a standard 3.5mm headphone jack on the top. On the side, there is a SIM card slot. It's a dual SIM phone with expandable storage, and on the bottom, there is a micro USB port for charging. It supports Qualcomm's Quick Charge, along with a loudspeaker. And on the other side, there are textured keys for power and a volume rocker. On the front, we are looking at a 6-inch panel. It has a Full HD Plus resolution, which is tall, offering minimal bezels and in line with the latest trends of the industry. It doesn't have a notch either, so it's symmetrical on the top and the bottom, albeit at the cost of having slightly larger bezels on the bottom chin. So unlocking it with a fingerprint scanner is relatively quick, and again, the Snapdragon 625 is a very tried and tested chipset by now. In fact, it may be one of the most commonly used mid-end chips that Qualcomm has ever produced. Xiaomi tends to use it a lot on their phones, whether it's the Redmi line or on the latest Mi A2 Lite, and performance is generally better than your money's worth. It's fast, it's fluid, it's an octa-core chipset, and it's very energy efficient. The phone packs roughly a 3,400 milliamp hour pack that will last you through an entire day without any problems either, which is certainly nice to see. Colors look relatively natural. It's not super vibrant, as popping as on an AMOLED display, but viewing angles again are good for an IPS screen, and I think that the sharpness is also fair for the price point. Let's start by taking a closer look at the camera performance. So the app here is heavily customized, it doesn't look stock at all, and there are some pretty obnoxious shutter tones that luckily you can disable if you don't want to hear them. It reminds us of a kind of badly copied iOS clone because it has a pretty long and weird looking font, but you're able to slide through to access features like a normal shot, panoramic shot, as well as what they call a figure, which is really just accessing the bokeh effect. The interesting thing here is after you capture a shot using bokeh, it needs to process it for a little longer than we are used to compared to maybe a Xiaomi or a Huawei device, but it works. We can also change things like the resolution using the settings on the top, and there's even a QR code scanner built directly onto the camera app. Definitely a step below what Xiaomi and Huawei are able to do on their phones. Another sample of the bokeh, so if we kind of zoom in here, the edge detection again seems to be alright. And here's a comparison of the HDR. So this first image here was captured just in the regular mode. The second one was captured with HDR on, so you can tell that it's able to pull out a little bit more details of the shot and kind of brightens up the overall image. In terms of zooming in, we still get a fair amount of detail. Again, what's interesting here is it almost takes a split second for the phone to snap the image into focus before it looks clear. Same thing can be said about the front-facing camera. It works better than expected in good lighting environments. It has a number of different beauty effects that you can apply, and the overall results do turn out fairly pleasing. In low light though, the camera does really struggle. There is no stabilization of any sort, so you have to hold very still, and even then it tends to have some issues with exposures as well as with details. Overall, this is a passable camera. It's really nothing to write home about. The interface isn't great, but the overall results of your shots can turn out better than expected in good lighting environments. Pausing there, the takeaway is that video playback is decent. The speakers get a lot louder than I was expecting. In fact, we were only about 80% volume, and it already filled up this entire small room without any problems. With that being said, it definitely distorts at higher volumes. It's not very bass rich, it's not very detailed sounding, so luckily you have a headphone jack, which you can use to improve the performance if you want better audio experience. Otherwise, web browsing is also going to be quite smooth and responsive. Again, with this octa-core chipset, the Snapdragon 625 does surprisingly well. Sure, it's not going to be as instantaneous as a 800 series chipset, but when it comes to general navigation, even on this desktop version of Chrome, the page, you can tell that it's still loading back very well. So if we go into a site like CNET, for instance, again, loading times are just very quick. No checkerboard patterning, a little bit slower to load up some of these ads and videos, but again, this is a complex page. It comes with 3 gigs of built-in RAM on the base model, and it has a 4 gig RAM variant, which doubles the internal memory from 32 to 64 gigs, and that sells for about $15 more. Now we can come to probably one of the worst elements of this phone is going to be its software and skin on top of Android. It's technically Nougat underneath the very thick skin here, but it's hardly recognizable because of all the things that they tried to change, and it's not great because there's a lot of bugs. It says you've cleared everything, but this multitasking page won't close out until you press on the home key. And that's kind of the trend of this phone, is it has good hardware, but the software is really a letdown, and it requires a lot more work from you, the consumer, to get it to a state where it's usable. Now, because China Mobile is, again, it's based in mainland China, where Google services are currently blocked, you don't have any of the Google services pre-installed, such as Chrome and YouTube. I had to do this myself. You also don't get the Play Store pre-installed. So if you want that, you have to do a little bit of rooting, or you have to install the APK yourself. Drag down notification tray is also blue accented, and again, a very Huawei inspired way. Now this phone does have NFC as well, in addition to Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth. It supports 4G LTE, so it's all good in terms of connectivity. And although there isn't a universal search, I can pinch in to have access to my frequently used apps. So it's almost a hidden log of all the apps that you've been using recently, and it remembers those so you can swap back and forth between them. The virtual keys on the bottom here, like we said in our unboxing, looks very similar to a Samsung skin or a Samsung experience in terms of the logos, but it's not too bad. Otherwise, if we take a closer look at some of this bloatware installed, a lot of these entertainment apps, again, are pretty much worthless to the vast majority of consumers, but under tools, there are a few nice additions. You'll find a download manager, a digital voice recorder, and a Office editor for Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Here we see other things like the clock, which has also been tweaked very heavily by them. It looks nowhere like the stock version of Android, which actually I'm not a huge fan of at all, because the accents and the color schemes are not consistent at all. The orange here looks alright, but the phone here is blue and black, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since the drag down shade is also blue and black. So a lot of color incorrect matching. So in terms of the settings, if we take a closer look at these, you can actually change the virtual keys in terms of their orientation. You do get a handful of gestures, including double clicking on the display to wake it up from sleep. You can also use 3 fingers to capture a screenshot, and then use the accelerometer to turn the phone over to mute a call. So some of these things that we've been seeing from other phones are also here, including a glove mode that makes the display very sensitive, so that even if you're using gloves in the winter, it can still sense your touch. Other elements of the phone don't really need too much explanation in terms of the raw performance and the ability for you to download games and titles that you need, such as maybe even Asphalt 9 or PUBG Mobile. It will still run and load just fine. Again, it's just using a Snapdragon 625, so performance is pretty much identical to the countless phones that Xiaomi have released over the past 2 years using that chipset. So it handles those graphically intensive games fairly well, better than expected, and it does an even better job on 2D titles, things like Angry Birds or Stack, for instance. You are going to have to wait a little longer on loading times compared to a Snapdragon 800 series, but again, it does all right. This is, again, a very energy efficient chipset, so never thermal throttles. It remains very cool in terms of temperature, even when you are playing back games or trying to use the camera for longer than 45 minutes. So that's pretty much it as far as our review of the very strange China Mobile N3. Again, on paper, this is an excellent value phone just because of the hardware that they're using, the Snapdragon 625 at this ridiculously low price. The build and construction are also evocative of a phone that is many times more expensive than it is. With that being said, where it really falls short is on software. This is really a diamond in the rough, so although it has the raw performance, it is totally dependent on the user to tweak it to make it more optimal, because if this was a super polished phone, it wouldn't be priced at this ridiculously low cost. But if you are trying to hunt for, again, a really good bargain, then maybe this is something that you would want to consider taking a closer look at. You can check out more details in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the China Mobile N3.